Good afternoon. Some information has come to my attention that I had not been aware of previously. I'm going to try to be brief in this regard. I just found information concerning a organization of mothers from Russia and the countries of the former Soviet Union that undertook to organize in order to find their sons who had disappeared during the Chechen War. It describes a specific mother who was one of the co founders of this organization. It discusses the mobilization of young Russian men to fight in Chechnya. It discusses also their efforts once the sons had been in prison, some of them at least, were released and the conditions under which they were released. But it also says that, as it says in this particular article from 1996, that there were more than 1,200 visits by mothers from Russia to Chechnya to attempt to ascertain information about their missing sons, including insofar as it had been identified that they had been detained, to seek their release. Now, I have to be honest that I do not know a great deal about the Chechen War and the context for the Chechen War, but I understand now that events in my life when I first attempted to go to college are connected to a variety of matters related to the former Soviet Union, and that there may actually be some correlations in terms of events associated with the Chechen War, the Chechen Civil War, and other factors. But what I'm also concerned about is an understanding that during this time frame, my understanding is that there had been a revisitation for a short period of time of a policy that was alarmingly prevalent during the 1980s in Central America regarding the disappearance of people who had been identified as political activists or in positions of political leadership. As a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to meet with an organization, including one that was founded by mothers and spouses and partners of people who had been politically disappeared throughout the 1980s. Last year, I understand I was witness to what I was concerned and believe have since been able to justify was an effort to use issues through the Department of Treasury concerning semi short term Treasury notes to speculate on the anniversary of the school shooting in Beslan in Chechnya. It turns out that in my efforts to attempt to address that matter, including the fact that around that time I found the specific information and reported on it, my account was seized. My YouTube account was seized. I was not able to access it for nearly 2 weeks, while I understand somebody else used my YouTube account for all kinds of other efforts. And to be honest with you, I had to go through a whole other process just to be able to access my regular YouTube account. But in the meantime, things had unfolded. There was an event that occurred on April of 2020 that I had reflected in another forum. But the anniversary of that, it now turns out, occurred on a day when that very organization involving the organization that was attempting to support people who had been politically disappeared, at least as it's reported right now, ended up getting tear gassed. Now, I was not aware that that organization had been tear gassed. It's an organization located in Honduras. Right now, the information online says that somebody threw tear gas into the courtyard area of the building outside the city's capital, and that the date that happened correlated with a time frame 2 years before I made notices on my YouTube account. And in my verbalizations, I actually use specific references without being conscious of it that were directly connected to the conversations I actually had when I was on site, including in connection with the area wherein the office of concern is located. And this lets me know that somebody used that attack, that gas, that tear gas attack on the building of that organization as a benchmark for some other kind of strategy. My understanding is that this year will be the 25th anniversary, if I'm correct, of the end of the Chechen Civil War. Did somebody set up some sort of process last year concerning relationships, deals associated with the school shooting in Beslan in order to try to materialize some outcome in connection with the anniversary of the Chechen Civil War? And did they use a common factor of political disappearances in both countries as a means by which to do what? Attempt to reaffirm or re-up a paradigm of kidnapping political dissidents and then doing what? You see, in my own experience, I have come to realize that I personally am disappeared. I have been disappeared. I've been disappeared not only in terms of a public realm, but have been subjected to a condition that I contend is actually what the whole situation around political disappearance was. As certain people that were highly functioning and highly capable were not murdered. They were not murdered, first of all, in order to torment communities with the ambiguity and the unknowingness, the confirmation of their death, including the actual access to or possession of their body so it could be buried or cremated or it could be put to rest, but also because those people were kidnapped and harbored somewhere so that they could be expropriated and they could be harvested so that other people who honestly don't have the capabilities themselves can run scenarios and test paradigms and rationales and now actually use them for illicit digital financing to support their political activities, which also include covering up for crimes committed by members of the financial sector that are using the surveillance on these people as part of financing paradigms. Now that these financing paradigms also go into weapons development and or weapons distribution, or in the cases of some other information that I've learned, are expected to provide compensation, that actual human beings are being kidnapped to be redeployed as compensation. Now, literally, they're expected to do any number of things from work in actual slave labor conditions for somebody else's financial benefit to actually engage in sex acts in order to get their survival or resource needs met. And that what's been happening is an extraordinary amount of extortion that requires one to actually commit and demonstrate through engaging in certain actions that they're willing to cooperate with certain kinds of crime or certain kinds of orchestrations, or they're literally isolated. So what I'm saying is, I don't believe that most of the people identified as disappeared are dead. I believe they were kidnapped and they were taken somewhere and they've been ritually and systematically exploited ever since. And that the big dirty secret is that there are entire political movements that actually know. That they don't want to talk about it as people who have been disappeared. They have other preferences that they'd rather focus on. Because on some level, they know. They know how they could find these people. They know how they could actually engage these people. But there's been a very significant buy-in where people have availed themselves of the benefits at one level of exploitation and make progressively greater levels of buy-in to exploitation of other people, including people that may previously have been considered to be their colleagues or their comrades or people they may even have believed in politically. But they've allowed for them to be disappeared with some illusion that there will be a long-term buy-off, that there will be a long-term payoff, that the ends will justify the means. And so it's okay that certain people, including certain people, you might be able to get more bang for your buck, so to speak, have been kidnapped. And they've been exploited. It's a bribe, in a way, shape, or form. They are paying their patronage to whoever it is that they want to curry political favor for. And if they demonstrate that they'll comply with certain kinds of political arrangements, or if they demonstrate that they will, allow for a certain kind of recharacterization of what actually happens to that person, well, then they might get something for themselves politically. And so the concern now is what is going to happen since the situation with COVID-19 has been able to occur. We've had 25 years since the Chechen Civil War. We've had 35 years. And my contention is that part of what has happened is, on some level, people who were connected to mass murder and ritual exploitation, including people that were politically disappeared in Central America, were expecting some sort of compensation later down the line for being loyal. Yet they behaved, they kept their mouths shut, they let certain kinds and numbers of people be disappeared while another political paradigm outrolled. And that part of what we've been dealing with, especially connected to the border crisis situation, is what was expected to be the return. And now we're in a situation where there is a very significant crisis in this regard. And we don't talk about it like it is. Is it true that the brother or the son of the former leader of Nicaragua has been detained? Has he been detained, or is he in the process of being disappeared? See, this situation with Nicaragua is very significant, but so too is the situation with long-term movements of people to bring attention and awareness to systematic disappearance of people, and the false dichotomy that would allow for one to say, well, what happened in Chechnya is not the same as what happened in Honduras. This has been part of the false narrative. They've been intentionally polarizing. And people make justification for saying, well, this group of people doesn't serve our political ends. So if they're treated in this way, or that happens to them, well, they already signed up for it. And yet, the people that are availing themselves of the exploitation connected to people in their own community, they've made a justification for allowing to be chastised without actually politically justifying it, and also backing it up through either legal action or official public pronouncement, including in an understanding that we are under a situation of being engaged in warfare, or that we are ourselves being subjected to situations of duress. What we have instead is this situation where these polls have been able to magnify in a very significant way. Now, is this an appropriate manner in which to discuss allegations of pension fraud? Because on one level, that's exactly what this is. I contend that the disappearances that happened during the 80s, among many, many, many other things, including the other sorts of events that came out of that, following Iran-Contra, during the war in Iraq, Abu Ghraib, what we've allowed to happen in Israel and Palestine, things that have proliferated in Afghanistan and Syria specifically, but not exclusively, very, very, very repulsive handling of the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, has been about these periodic pivots in a long-term situation that was intended to orchestrate the kind of engineering we have, both politically and socio-structurally. But what are we going to do now that you've been disappeared? right? Entire movements of people have been disappeared. I'm very concerned about this. If you are somebody that is still looking for your son from the Chechen Civil War, I hope you find them. They may well still be alive. If you're somebody that's still looking for your son or your husband or your brother from the time frame during the the early 80s, even up through now, he or she may be alive. I know I am. I'm still alive. But this is also a serious situation because it can't just merely be blamed on the military. And it can't just merely be blamed on some sort of archetypical ideation of the concept of a cartel leader. These are things that take very significant political resources to pull off and maintain. Who among you that's in office right now is getting your compensation from somebody you know has been disappeared? You're not allowed to do this. You're not authorized to do this. And you're certainly not authorized to kidnap people in your own country and then make them available as compensation to people in other countries, regardless of whether those countries are friend or foe. You don't have a right to hold people without any due process and harvest them and exploit them so that you can simulate that you have their capabilities or their capacities to engage in some kind of political activity, and then put them at the availability of people in other countries who intend to do the same. I wish that there was something more I could say right now, but this is apparently the situation we're in right now.